Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining our webinar today. Today's webinar is called Addressing Learning Loss and Social Emotional Learning with Creative Robotics. I'm really excited to be joined by the two guests that we have today who are going to share their stories about some really interesting implementations of creative coding education for young kids to address these important sort of challenges that we have at this time in our sort of journey through this weird year that we've all shared together. So my name is Jason Ennis. I'm the Director of Curriculum, Training, and Product Management at Kinderlab Robotics. I'm joined by Tamika Grizzle, an Innovation Specialist with Cobb County Schools in Georgia. Hi, Tamika.
Hey, everyone.
Hi, and I'm also joined by Jane DeWinter. Jane's the Executive Director of Big Learning in Maryland, an enrichment provider to Maryland districts. Hi, Jane.
Hi, welcome everyone.
Yeah, all right, thank you. So I'll just share a couple of housekeeping points and talk a little bit about our agenda today, and then I'm going to turn it over to my guests. So today, we'll start actually with a brief little poll where we ask you to share your role in early childhood education. So that's going to be our first order of business. Before we go on to that poll though, I'll let you know that we will be taking questions in this webinar. You're not live on the microphone right now, but there's a questions feature within the GoToMeeting interface. You can type a question to our behind the scenes moderator, Christina, who is our marketing director. Thank you, Christina. Christina will answer questions she can right away, but others she'll save to pass on to our panelists during the question and answer phase of the webinar. So we're gonna save the last 15 minutes or so for your questions, and Jane and Tamika can answer those questions live. So if you have questions anytime, just fire them off in that questions feature, and Christina will save them and pass them along. So I'll talk a little bit about Kibo, the robot that Kinderlab Robotics creates, and which Jane and Tamika have made part of their activities in their different programs. And then I'll turn it over to our guests. So before we do that though, I just wanted to address, to sort of learn a little bit about all of you who have joined the webinar with us today. So I wonder if you would mind sharing just a little bit about what your role is in early childhood education. So what I'm going to do is pop up a little poll onto the screen. All you have to do is just click which one of these kind of best represents your role within early childhood education. And we'll just give, a few, 20 seconds or so for you to have a look at that. Are you a classroom teacher, a specialist? Are you more in administration? Are you involved in out of school time or informal ed like museums or enrichment programs? Or are you a researcher? So thanks, we're getting a nice response to the poll. So I really appreciate everybody kind of sharing a bit about who they are. I'm gonna close it in just about 5 more seconds and then I'll share out the results. Okay, let's close that out and then share just so you all can learn a little bit about each other. So it looks like we have a lot of folks here from a lot of educators from schools, whether classroom teachers, administration, or library and tech specialists. So thank you for coming to the webinar today. It looks actually like we have a really nice broad cross-section of folks who share an interest in early childhood technology education. All right, so thanks. Thanks for taking a minute to share about who you are. So briefly, before I turn it over to our panelists, I just wanted to share a little bit about Kinderlab Robotics, Kibo, and the kind of philosophy of STEAM education in early childhood that our robot and curriculum embodies. So Kinderlab is the creation of our co-founder, Professor Marina Bears. Kibo is a robot kit for young kids, kids as young as 4, to allow them to engage in coding, creative self-expression with coding, engineering experimentation. And Dr. Bears created Kibo along with her research group at Tufts University. Professor Bears is the chair of the Elliott Pearson School at Tufts, and she runs a research group called the DevTech Research Group that focuses on exploring ways to support our many child development goals using creative technology experiences. So it's not really about how do we shoehorn technology into early childhood. It's how can we help children develop all of the skills and attributes that we know we want them to develop more effectively with these creative technology experiences. So if you're interested in the pedagogy of technology in early childhood, I'd recommend you check out any of Dr. Bears's books. You can get a full list of her books and publications at our website at that address there. And just so you know, the slide recording will be available to everyone after this webinar. So Kibo, the robot that Dr. Bears created and which our company exists to share with teachers, is a physical computing device. It's totally screen-free. So children don't use an app or a computer or an iPad or anything. They use physical wooden blocks where each block represents one instruction for the robot to take. The children create a sequence out of these blocks, and then the robot acts out the program that the children created with those blocks. This allows us to incorporate Kibo and robotics activities in a way that doesn't require the use of any screens. Of course, last year has made that much more complicated, and both Jane and Tamika will speak to that and some of the challenges in doing this kind of hands-on screen-free activity within the context of, the pandemic year. When children engage with coding in this way that's screen-free, we're tapping into something that we know about early childhood, which is that young children learn best with concrete manipulatives. And when they can take these abstract ideas and represent them with physical objects they can interact with in the space of the classroom. That's one of the most powerful things supporting Kibo, and it's the reason that we have this physical block-based coding system rather than using screens to teach these concepts. Another great thing about robotics and about Kibo in general, though, is that we can use sort of familiar arts and crafts materials, art materials, drawings, to allow the children to decorate the robot and transform it into a character in a story or a vehicle that's engaging with a town, if we're learning about our sort of the role of the school within the community. We can create a Kibo animal and represent its behavior in a habitat. So this idea of decorating the robot allows us to tap into imagination play, allows us to make cross-curricular connections so that the children are using code and engineering to explore a wide range of topics that are interesting to them and that connect across the curriculum. And that's sort of the essence of where this dovetails with ideas of helping children recover from learning loss and also supporting their social emotional development. So just framing that briefly before I do hand it over to my guests here. We know that right now, schools are facing a lot of challenges when it comes to thinking about how to reopen safely, how to bring students back, how to facilitate small group work again, how to help children address the emotional challenges that they're carrying with them after this past year. And of course, the recently passed stimulus program, the American Recovery Plan, or American Rescue Plan, includes funds that are earmarked for schools to spend on programs to support recovery from learning loss. That could be summer programs, extended hour programs, new curricula. These are non-recurring funds, so they are ideal for using to support purchases of sort of new equipment, new curricula, starting new programs. So we actually have a blog entry that's linked at the bottom there that talks about how resources like Kibo can help support these recovery goals. And some examples that we would share are we have a range of activities within our curriculum that connect to things like math. So programming Kibo to travel set distances, for example, on a bowling alley is a fundamental math connection where children are measuring the classroom through the movement of their robot. We can support ELA standards as we get children to decorate their robot like a character in a story. Here it's the family from going on a bear hunt, for example, and the children reenact the story using the program they create for their robot, supporting our goals in early literacy standards. So by using a tool like Kibo and these kinds of creative technology experiences, we can teach these important STEM concepts and STEAM concepts, but we can also integrate them fundamentally into these core academic areas. Working with Kibo is also a great way to facilitate small group activities. So giving children different roles with the robot. And I know our Tamika in particular, I know is really conscious of how of facilitating small group work in her projects. So I'm sure she'll share about that. And helping children sort of relearn how to work together in these small groups is part of addressing those social emotional goals that we have for our young learners. So that's kind of how I might frame using Kibo to support some of these goals, but let's hear about some more concrete examples and some real world lessons that our guests can share with you that you can take back to your own schools. So we'll hear first from Tamika. So Tamika is a professional STEM and innovation professional learning specialist in Cobb County, as I mentioned. So that's a large public school district in Georgia. She's involved in a range of STEM and STEAM activities, including helping Mableton Elementary School become a STEM and STEAM certified school. And she works with other educators who are interested in getting that certification. So whether you're in Georgia and following that particular line of STEM and STEAM certification, or in another state that has a similar program, I think what Tamika will share today will be really valuable for you. So thank you very much, Tamika, for joining us, and I'm gonna turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Jason. Yes, so the reason why we got started with Kibo in our school is because our principal did want to address that learning loss that occurred, when the world shut down last year. And at this particular school, I've been there 2 years now, they were not really engaged in coding and robotics. So that was one of the things that I was able to bring to this school. So when I started this program, it was new for everyone. And so I presented, my proposal to bring coding and robotics, but, it was like, well, how is it going to help, math? I said, well, just trust me, it will. And so I, let her know that with Kibo, it's all about computational thinking, mathematical skills, critical thinking skills. And that's exactly what I did with my K2 students. We, reviewed facts that from previous years and integrated into the club and used the robot to help come up with problem solving skills and answers to problems that I will present to them. All right, next slide. Okay, so because it was new, I did, if you do get Kibo, you get like a couple of posters, and this was a poster that was included. I laminated it, we went over Kibo. It is a little fragile. If you're gonna be working with kindergartners, you gotta tell them, hold it with 2 hands. The other day I was working with a kindergartner and he slammed the box down, on the floor. I'm like, oh, you gotta be careful. So you do wanna go over the parts of Kibo, letting them know to be gentle. All of my robots are females, just to encourage that with the girls in computer science. So I tell them she is very fragile, so you gotta be really careful with the parts. Don't press, because they see it as like a car, so they want to press down on it and drive it. So you gotta tell them, no, you gotta be gentle with her. And once they are familiar with the parts, it's easier to get into the learning part of it. All right, next. And throughout our entire school, we are STEM and STEAM certified. So we do use the engineering design process when we engage in any STEM or STEAM activities. And this is just a really cute way to present the ED process to these young learners, especially kindergartners, first and second grade. It's a great visual for them. It's not in detail, it's on their level. And we do go through this process when we meet. And we do meet, I meet with each grade level 3 times a week for an hour. So before we begin our lessons or activities, we kind of go over the EDP process, and then we engage in the activity so they'll know, okay, we're in this stage, the imagine stage. Now we're going to be planning, create, and of course, at the end, they present their work. Next. Oh, okay, my babies. So this particular picture, you can see that we work with whiteboards and not Sharpies, Expo markers. And if you look on the left, I was telling, the club members, this is the planning stage. So they were beginning to learn all the blocks. So I will put out, of course, the movement blocks are the easiest blocks, the begin, the end blocks, turn, and they have learned those blocks in previous classes. So in this particular instance, I said, well, before we get into coding and putting your program together, you have to plan what you're going to be doing. And these are kindergartners, so they cannot, fully write a sentence, and I'll allow them to draw a picture. So on the left, she drew a picture of Kibo, and then underneath, she was drawing each block in sequence as to what she wanted her robot to perform. And on the right, it was so cute. She was looking at her blocks and copying the pictures on her whiteboard. So that was always fun to see. And then this is just a close picture. And then you can see on the left, she had like the begin block, and then move forward, turn right. And I think that's like the light up block. That's the most popular block. They love to turn the light bulb on Kibo different colors. And I feel like this is so critical because when they put that light changing block and it doesn't happen, we go into critical thinking skills and communicate, okay, why don't you see any colors? What is missing? And they realize they have to take that attachment and put on the block. So I love how they have all these different attachments that go with Kibo, because if you want to use that particular attachment, it's in your codes, but you don't see it. You got to go back, rethink, go through the engineering design process. What did I miss? What do I need to add? Oh, okay, I'm missing this attachment. Let me go back and get the attachment and include it into my program so I can see my Kibo perform what I asked her to do. All right, next block. All right, this was one of my favorite. I don't know why. We were in my office. I'm not sure. Let me speak to that. Okay, so my clubs are really, really small. We are in the pandemic. They're wearing masks. Normally, I do have 5 Kibos. So with that, I will have 10 students in my club. But, for safety reasons, I only had 5 students. So some days when all the kids didn't show up, I will have just 2. So just for, safety reasons, each student had their own Kibo. But I mean, if you take precaution and really careful, I feel like you can, couple your students, just have those wipes on hand, those hand sanitizing wipes, and just wipe down the blocks, wipe down the Kibo, really gently, if you do decide to use it in groups. But in this particular club, again, it was new to the school, new to the kids. I did not want them to, touch the robot and share and go back and forth. So for me, it was easier just to do it this way. So this is first grade. I gave them a word problem, and of course, I included their names, and they had to figure out the answer to the word problem. Now, the club is an hour long, and this particular word problem, it was on their level, but the word problem wasn't too challenging. It took them about 30 to 45 minutes to complete this task, and I loved it because as simple as the blocks may seem, they still have to use those critical thinking skills, logical thinking skills to figure out the distance, like Jason said in the beginning, to measure how much do I need my robot to move forward, turn left, turn right. So for this particular assignment, they had to solve the word problem, use unit blocks as manipulatives to present the answer. Then they had to code Kibo to the answer. So they had to start Kibo at a certain distance from that whiteboard and make a turn to get to the answer and to get to their manipulative to show the answer. And at the end, Kibo had to do like a little dance or a light up. And so I was really, really happy with this session. they are going to get frustrated, and you have to tell them that's what computer scientists do. That's what scientists do. You know, they go back. It's an iteration process. Of course, I didn't use iteration, but I just let them know it's going to be a repetitive process. You're going to have to repeat, you know, rearranging your blocks, sequencing your blocks, putting them in the correct order, figuring out the distance. And then at the end, when they got it, I don't know if you can see the little lifesavers in the back. That was their motivation. I gave them a lifesaver for a treat. So I really do like this one. All right, and then the next one. And so this is just the codes that were put together. Oh, this day I introduced the recording block. Oh my goodness. They love to hear themselves speak and sing and talk. So in the end, this was the code that enabled them to get to the answer. And I did not tell them, you know, how to scan the blocks. At first, they scanned the forward block once and was like, Dr. Grizzle, I don't have any more forward blocks. I don't know how I'm going to get my robot to the answer. I said, yeah, that's a problem. Why don't you two work together, talk about it, figure it out, communicate. How can we use that one forward block to get to the answer? And I watched them struggle, which is okay. And then eventually they came up with, what if we scanned it more than once? And by this time, I did not introduce them to the repeat blocks. We were not learning conditionals until this, you know, more for in the future, but I just wanted them to begin with the basics, and they figured it out. So you don't want to tell them a lot. That's part of the fun, because when they do eventually get it, oh my goodness, that light bulb, that joy, that smile, that laugh. I had a video where I had one student jumping in the air. So, and I think I have this on my Twitter channel where the kid was like, yeah, just really, really happy because it's their own. I did not help them. They figured it out. It was challenging and they did it. So it was really rewarding for them. All right, next. All right, for this one, students cannot just put together their program and start scanning. They have to explain. It's like reading. I tell them this is like reading. You'll read from left to right. Tell me what your sentence, your program sentence says. So they have to read their blocks, their program, before they can scan and execute what they want their robots to do. And that's just my way of assessing their knowledge of the blocks, knowing exactly what they want their robots to do, because, you know, you got to test them sometimes. They want to just put the blocks together to begin to play because it is fun, but I had to slow them down. I said, okay, this is the challenge. Tell me how you're going to complete this challenge. So if you slow them down, allow them to explain, communicate, and you'll, you know, get a sense of, okay, are they understanding? Are they playing? You do want them to play, but you do want them to understand the basics of computer science and knowing that, you know, what they're doing is essential and, you know, critical, because it's fun, but you do want to let them know the career path behind it. This is what real computer scientists do. And so explaining is a very important part of us coding in the club. All right, next. Yes, socially distanced. Again, normally I would have 2 students per robot, but I just couldn't, even with wiping down, and I only had an hour and it's their first time, so I didn't want to spend a lot of time wiping down the robots and then getting back. So maybe, hopefully next year the restrictions are lifted. I will group them and hopefully I'll have the same students like the following year plus new students, so that if I do have to stop and wipe it down, it'll be a smoother process, because, you know, I do have some experts in the group that can get back quickly into the activities that I have planned for them. So that's how I particularly used Kibo in my sessions. They had to social distance. Next. All right, so I normally don't give certificates, but it was their first time and they were so excited. They did not want the club to end. Their parents were begging and pleading not to end the club. Now, let me tell you the real secret behind that. We are a Title I school, and when I was planning this was funding out of our 20-day funds. So when the 20 days was up, I said, okay, the club has concluded. You know, maybe next year we'll begin again. So I went back to my coach's admin meeting And they kept asking me, are you finished? I said, yeah. And I'm like, this is like over several days. They kept asking, am I complete? Is the club finished? I'm like, I kept telling them, yes, I had 20 days. But in actuality, that was just a nominal, heading. 20-day funds was used in the past, but they kept the title 20-day funds, and I took it literal that it was 20 days. So I did restart the program last week, and I'm calling it the Advanced Coding and Robotics Club with Mathematics Integration. So I am using the same students because the parents really loved it. They enjoyed it. The other day, this is the advanced club I'm working with now. I'm using Kibo. I was teaching kindergartners how to read a coordinate map. It had numbers and it had letters, and they had to locate a hamburger or a hamburger restaurant on this map. It's a really simple map. So the hamburger restaurant was located at N20. So I had a starting point for their Kibo on this coordinate map. And I told the parents, oh my gosh, your child did so great today. They're learning how to read a coordinate plane. They're like, what? I said, yes, I have high standards. I put it out there for them. Your students can do more than you think they can do. And I will ask, well, how do you read a coordinate plane map? And they're like, you use numbers and letters. So that's a great way, again, to reinforce those mathematical skills, especially kindergartners, identifying letters and numbers. So I did introduce a large map with different objects and items with a coordinate plane with the addition of Kibo to code Kibo to get to those certain items on the map. So we celebrated their hard work, and I restarted the program because of this right here. So I was happy about that. Next. All right, and this is the crew coming together. These are my kindergartners, first and second grade, and this is a picture that we took for the yearbook. This is our first ever Mableton Elementary Coding and Robotics Club, and I was so proud of them. So this is like their silly pictures. Notice the boys are sitting and all the girls are with their robots at the top because, girls rule computer science, and that's one thing I try to let them know that a lot of times, we don't have a good representation of women and marginalized group, people of color in computer science. So I was glad to bring this to my school, and we had a wide range of culture and races in my club. So I was happy to expose them to this at such a young age, which I think it's needed. All right. And the next steps, I talked about the Advanced K2 Coding and Robotics Club, which is now in sessions. We're going to be learning about sensors, conditional statements, those if-then, and then we are learning the repeat until blocks. They don't have to keep scanning that one block more than once. But like the first time, they just learned the basics, and now we're going to take it another step up. So that is my presentation on my wonderful club.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tamika. It was really great to hear about the different sort of ways that you allowed the children to kind of discover solutions to some of those problems. I think that's a really powerful lesson, and thank you for sharing it, because that idea of the engineering design process and children's kind of discovery of these answers on their own is so much the foundation of that kind of constructivist pedagogy that supports a lot of this style of learning. And I really appreciated you sharing that perspective, how it's sort of play, but we also want to encourage children to really reflect and think about their plan and be able to explain what they're doing. And that's a great thing to keep both of those goals in mind. So thank you, Tamika.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Cool. All right, so then now we have the opportunity to hear from our other guest. Jane DeWinter is the executive director of Big Learning. Big Learning is based in Montgomery County, Maryland, and they provide out-of-school time programs to districts in that area. Jane is the executive director, but she also manages herself the science and engineering program at Big Learning. So she's going to share a bit about programs that they've run during the pandemic and some really concrete lessons that you might be able to put into use in your school or program. So welcome, Jane, and thank you. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thanks. Next slide. Okay, well, so I just wanted to first share a little bit about the framework of how we've organized our program. Pre-pandemic, it was in person after school, and we would take 12 students and we would have the kids work in pairs so that they would share, and so that's 6 KIBOs, and our basic classes were formed around 8 weeks, so that was 8 one-hour sessions. When we had some funding, we've been lucky enough to have funding from the state of Maryland for robotics programs, and those we've been running as 12-week programs. During the pandemic, of course, we now hate the word pivot, but that's good description of what everybody had to do. And so all of our classes went to Zoom. And so we looked at how many robots we had, and we had 14 KIBOs. Well, we actually had more with the teacher, but so we said, okay, well, we'll do it to 14 students. And we extended them to a 10 classroom, 10 classes, 75 minutes each, but we compressed it into 5 weeks because what we were doing was delivering the entire KIBO set and craft materials and, some basic tools like scissors and a flashlight and things like that to every child's home, so that we wanted to be able to, get through multiple cohorts of kids. So we compressed it down to 5 weeks. So the kids met twice a week. We're now starting to think about what we're going to be doing, when we in the fall. We're still conflicted. We still don't really know how things will be standing as far as, are we going to have kids share the KIBOs or not? And one of the things is that when you are doing an out of school time program and you're not based at any one school, you are carrying all this equipment in to every school, and then carrying it back out, putting it in the back of your car. And I have also taught KIBO, and I've some stuff for somebody who was out ill for a month. I was teaching KIBO 4 days a week, and so that entire 6 to 8 KIBO sets was getting in and out of my car 4 days a week. That's a lot to carry. So if we need to have each student have their own KIBO, we're going to have to think about our class numbers, how many we can accommodate. We're also trying to think, some of the takeaways, some of the good things that we had was, having a longer class time was a positive thing. And we created a fairly robust journal that the students were using. And some of the features in that we want to take with us going forward. Okay, you can move. All right, so going virtual created a number of logistical challenges. The pictures there are us packing sets to deliver to the kids. Now, the first thing that we realized is that, KIBO is pretty basic and simple to use. There's still troubleshooting that the instructor has to do, whether it's, how do I really turn this off? How do I change the batteries? So we did write down an extensive set of directions that parents could have for, so that they'd be able to change the batteries for KIBO when the child had it at home for 5 weeks. We needed to make sure we did not have 14 of everything. We had 14 basic sets, but, we had to buy some more catapults and different things. Given that we were sanitizing things, 14 entire sets at one time before we delivered them, we actually purchased some UV light sanitizers, and that actually worked out pretty well. We just spread components out on the whole conference table, set the remote control, leave it for an hour, and go back. And we felt like, that was a good method for us. It actually, I think, was more time saving than wiping everything down, which we had been doing in the past. We knew kids needed some basic supplies and craft supplies, so those were all packed. We did deliver with just contactless delivery. When parents register, we have phone numbers, et cetera. And so we would put the robots in the car, let people know, this is the day we're coming. We text people before we arrive that we are coming. Once it's left on the doorstep, okay, your robot's here. That seemed to work pretty well. And because over Zoom, it does tend to eat up some time. That's why, we added some time to classes and made this basic session a little bit longer. We did not want to just deliver a box with all of the Kibo components in it, because we knew that it was going to be kind of overwhelming, and a child was not going to be able to open that box and then pick out the things that we want to have for the first week. So we actually organized it, class by class, which components are we going to be adding for this particular class. And we put those components into a Ziploc bag, labeled it, this is for class 2, this is for class 4, etc. And so we, so that the kids could keep track of things and locate them when they needed to. Okay, you can go on. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is the social emotional learning. And the reason why I'm saying virtually, because I know that most of you will be in person in the fall and will be, addressing this in person. But I've pulled these from a trainings that we gave to all of our instructors last fall, when we had to think about how are we going to support kids and what sort of additional steps do we need to take to support them in this time, in the pandemic. And so, we catched a couple of things from our middle school program that uses the Weichert system, where, so teachers need a warm welcome. And that's something right now also, as your kids come in, you say hi to them. If then a bunch of them arrive at once, you welcome the class. You don't just kind of start in the first line of your lesson. A dependable routine, especially now when kids' lives have been turned upside down for almost a year and a half. They need to have a dependable routine. I mean, that's something kids need anyway, but it's especially important now. Empathetic listening. One of the things we knew that, some of our kids are going through some really tough times, whether they're maybe living with grandparents because their parents are working, whether someone in their family has been ill and has died, whether not, they have no access to their friends, and extended family. It's very difficult. We knew that kids might need to share and might, blurt some things out. But our teachers aren't counselors. They're not prepared to, really respond or address, some of the, really deep issues that a child might bring up. But we talk to them, you're listening, you're acknowledging, and if it's something really serious, this is the process for referring it to somebody who would be prepared to address it. So you can move on to the next slide. So the next component that we use or process we use is reflection. And this is really, this is important in terms of consolidating knowledge, as well as just giving children a chance to share out. That when reflection, it's really some way of summing up what the kids did. So whether it's asking a question, what did you think was the most fun? Which block were you most surprised about, what it could do? Something where you are trying to stimulate the kid to have to go back and sort of do a mental, fast forward through what all they covered in the class. And it also helps, you're giving kids a chance to share, which we think is a really important component, something we're really trying to build into Kibo. And finally, one-on-one attention. What we were hearing from our school district and from, sort of other professionals addressing sort of the, the impact of the pandemic was that there were many kids who they really were not getting the one-on-one attention at home that they were used to getting. And it might be because their parents were, really struggling and stressed out and not there. It might be because they were, again, staying with somebody else. It might be that their parents were home 24/7, but were so stressed out themselves with working from home and handling, online education for the child and maybe siblings, and that, it just really wasn't time for people at the end of the day to go and do, whether it's like reading the stories to kids like they were doing, or what happened today, having those conversations, even conversations that sometimes happen while you're driving your kids around to and from events. Those are important times. And so what we really wanted to focus on was to make sure that our teachers were noticing kids and were giving them a lot of individual attention. And in noticing things, what we tried to emphasize is not that you were going to just say, oh, well, that was really good. Oh, well, that's nice. Oh, you made a really fabulous little craft person to put on your keyboard, because those are just compliments. Those aren't necessarily noticing what the kids would do. And so to drive that home, we actually showed this next slide, the pictures. This was part of our training for teachers, is we were trying to say, okay, well, so what would you say to a child if this was the equivalent of what they came up with for their Kibo or for their craft project? What could you say? And so, we actually had our teachers throw out comments, okay, so what you could say about the sweater is, well, that's really green, or, oh, I see you put a lot of ornaments on that, or, oh, I see that you worked hard to have a pattern on that. And the other picture could be, well, I can see that you paid a lot of attention to detail. So you're not evaluating it in any way, but you are saying something that is showing the child that you are actually really seeing what they did. And that's very important. Okay. And then I just wanted to bring up a few things that I think are important. I know my dogs are yipping. So we know, evidence and what we've been seeing across the country is that Black and brown children and students living in poverty have significantly greater learning losses. That is, that's very evidence-based. But we don't want to assume that, other children who don't fall in those categories haven't also developed gaps or have some learning loss. It's just, they may on average, not have the same level of learning loss as, other cohorts of children, but they're going to be individual students who need you to notice that, they missed out on some big element of, what they were supposed to be learning. Also, we think kids will be glad to be back in school, but we want to remind everybody, and we'll be doing this with our own teachers, that don't expect that children are going to return to school with all of the same classroom management behaviors that we had trained in them. I'm really thinking about kids who are going to be coming back they're going to be in first grade in the fall, that those students, they were in nursery school, pre-K, when the pandemic started. And then that just stopped abruptly. Most schools just stopped. So they lost the last quarter of their pre-K. They spent kindergarten, most of them, in a virtual program, or else a program that was very socially distanced and had very small groups of kids. Those kids are not going to know how to, have 15 kids line up and be quiet. And so your expectations need to be tailored towards that. And we also feel like with the return, even though kids might be like returning, that there are going to be anxieties over, as all of some of these restrictions are getting relaxed. Kids are going to be anxious over those. Okay, so going on, we have potential activities. Now, this is a picture of our catapult And this is one thing that our kids are doing. We give them all of these cups, and so they can build a tower, and they can experiment of shooting the balls, or the either the ping pong balls, or we give them pom-poms, shooting them from different distances. What adjustments do they have to make to hit their target? Pre-planning, we do have a lot of pre-planning. We have stickers that we've created that are stickers of the basic blocks, and we try to have kids write out a program ahead of time. Also, sometimes we have the kids, they draw a path on the paper that they want their keyboard to follow. I'm sorry. Stop it. My dogs are not surviving the pandemic very well. And so then we have the kids draw a path that they want their keyboard to follow. Then they program it. Then they can go back and change their drawing or make notes, did it actually do what they wanted it to do? We really like storytelling so that the kids can create characters, use some craft supplies, make the characters, and then we use the recorder and have our kids record lines and sort of do little plays or acting things out. And we do the same thing with dances. Okay, you can go on. Okay, so this is one of the data collection things that we put in a journal for our catapult. And so we have the kids, we encourage them, test out different numbers of rubber bands, lever positions, and different types of balls, and record them. And the whole list of words there, or skills: measurement, multiplication, sequencing, data collection, onto repeated trials, storyboarding, constants, variables. Those are not words or concepts that we typically think that, oh, I'm teaching 4- and 5-year-olds these. But in doing this kind of activity, these are the things that you are teaching. And I don't use the word variables when I'm teaching Kibo, but if I'm asking them to try things out, that is in essence what I'm doing, saying vary the number of rubber bands and what happens, so that they're getting a sense of the scientific process without necessarily knowing they are. Okay, I'm going to quickly go through this. So we also do things, we give them tablecloths, they use the chairs, they make tunnels, they do characters. These characters here actually are Little Red Riding Hood and the Woodsman, and there was a wolf that didn't make it into the picture. And so they had lines from the story. Okay, you can go on. And so the last thing on the last slide is just making learning fun and playing to their strengths. I think if you have a child and you can identify what the gaps are, you don't necessarily want to approach those head on, because it's likely that the child has gaps in maybe the subject that they're the least interested in, or feel like that's not their strength. You don't want to put them in a situation where they're again going to be struggling. You want to give them something that they're going to be able to succeed at, and then use that as the bridge to the skills that they need. So I think Kibo is perfect for kids who have learning loss in mathematics, because you're not going at that head on, but they need to use so many math skills in order to do the Kibo and to process it. And so you want your children to succeed, and they all can. You just need to, it's really working on yourself so that you're able to let them achieve this. Okay. Sorry, I think I went over, but.
Thank you, Jane. Well, no, that was all really very interesting stuff, and I'm so glad that you shared it. And we do have some questions that have come in from the audience. I have to say though, I was struck by your the sort of dual emphasis that you placed on kind of the activities and the content that the children were engaging with, but also that really careful thinking that you and your instructors were doing about things like creating routines, creating space for children to kind of express how they're feeling without kind of probing, and your point about using kind of closing circles as an opportunity to kind of directly notice what children have worked on, the validating effect that has. Those are all lessons that I think apply to how we interact with the kids sort of in person or over Zoom. And it's nice to hear you are able to maintain that kind of social emotional support and kind of group collaboration in that context. And that actually ties into one of the questions that we had from the audience. I'll just advance this. We have about 10 more minutes, so we have a couple of questions from the audience before we wrap up. And I wanted to start with a question that we got, and this is sort of about the looking ahead to returning to school. So Tamika, I'll kind of direct it to you, but you know, in thinking, you shared your experience with the club, and I know you've also thought as an expert in kind of STEM certification, you also think about kind of helping classroom teachers do these kinds of activities. And I wonder, the question was about, you know, as we go back to in-person schooling, what sort of positive lessons can we carry from this pandemic year? You know, there's talk about you know, all of these changes that have been forced on us. We don't want to just go back to sort of, you know, worksheets and all the old ways that we did some of this learning. So maybe with an eye toward the club that you ran, are there things that you're excited to kind of bring into like everyday teaching at the schools that you work with that's kind of informed by your experience this past year?
Yeah, so like you were saying, you don't want to like jump back into things, you know, hopefully things will return to normalcy next year. But with using keyboards, I like Jane's idea, you know, using that recording to talk about, you know, what happened last year, how can we move forward, recording their voices, you know, allowing them to tell their experiences. So some of those will be great SEL lessons. At our school, you know, we do like, you know, morning meetings, and we engage in SEL, and we have different topics. So that would be a great time to incorporate Kibo into those morning lessons, to talk about emotions and feelings and those different lessons that teachers use. But that's given me an idea to go into the classrooms and allowing teachers to see, well, how can we incorporate Kibo into these morning meetings, these SEL lessons, to talk about, you know, the different experiences we've had, and how your experience might be different from somebody else's, you know, face-to-face versus virtual. And I feel like Kibo, especially with that recording tool, can get, you know, the message out, you know, allowing students to, you know, dress up Kibo as a person, and having the two robots communicating, timing it where one speaks, the other listens. That's another skill that students need to learn: communication, waiting your turn, being courteous. So I feel like that's very much needed when we talk about going back next year and, you know, reflecting on that year, not just pushing to the side, business as usual. We have to take baby steps to get to that place of normalcy.
That's a great point. Thank you, Tamika. Jane, do you have any, does that sort of provoke any thoughts for you? I know you spent a lot of attention on sort of supporting the social emotional through the way the teachers were dialoguing with the children. And does that give you thoughts about techniques you can bring into the in-person work you'll do next year?
Right. I mean, one of the things, I mean, we've always been fans of sharing out, because I think it's just my own life experience where I was leading an organization and had to do a lot of public speaking, and the number of people who come up to me all the time and say, I could never stand in front of a group of people and talk. And I know that, you know, most school systems, when kids are in, I think, 10th grade, they have to do a speech in their English class, and most of them are just dying inside. And so we have started off with our earliest kids that if they've done a program, if we said, okay, make your Kibo dance, we give them time to program it, and we set them up, they have some time, and then we just call everybody together and we cluster around, and, you know, each pair can just share out. And so it might only be 30 seconds, and there isn't a rubric, it's not an assignment, but they get to stand up in front of their peers and speak, you know, and explain something. And we just feel like this is really important, sort of as you know, the first steps of leading to a lifetime of just being comfortable sharing your ideas. It's so it became even more important during the pandemic, because since the kids had the Kibos at home, they were working on them, playing with them during the week. And so when the classes, each week when the class resumed, the kids were allowed to, if they wanted to, have sort of an individual moment where they could show what they had programmed their Kibo to do. And so we had some really, great imaginative things that they did. I guess the one other thing I wanted to mention is that I think that one of the strengths of, pulling in a lot of different components, whether it is just basic, designing paths and routes and have kids do measurement and figure out how to program it, or whether it's working with characters and having kids use craft things. We also focused on kids being able to share, et cetera, and experiments. And we have one unit that we did, we didn't do it virtually, but we do it in person, where we bring in a lot of pictures of robots. There's some fabulous robots out there. I mean, there's robots that look like fish, that they're actually being used in oceans to measure water pollution and things like that. So we have a 15-minute discussion about robots in general, and point out that, because a lot of kids do not understand that what they're doing with Kibo is what they would do if they achieve their goal of being a video game developer. So we're trying to, when talking about robots and programming, we're trying to connect those dots. And what we found is that when you can bring in different elements, different children shine. I've had kids who have been very quiet until they realize that, oh, okay, this is programming. This is what they would do as a game developer. Or kids who were very quiet until we told them, well, okay, we did the little red hen story, and create something and have your Kibo do it, and they came alive. So that in varying the experiences and the exercises and activities that you do, you are also providing opportunities for different kids to shine in different things.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. Okay, Tamika, we had one last question for you. We just have a couple of minutes, and this is more about kind of how you might have worked with teachers around Kibo. And I wonder if, especially in your work on, STEM certification, have you had experience introducing coding and robotics to other teachers? And can you share a tip or two to help a teacher who may be uncomfortable with incorporating robotics or coding into the classroom? What would be your suggestions for a teacher like that?
Absolutely. A lot of teachers, they shy away from it. They think it's so difficult. I don't have a background in computer science. Mine is education, but I just learned. And what you want to do is to model. Scratch Junior is a part of that whole, Kibo family. So I started off at Scratch Junior in our school. I have teachers sign up for the media center where the students come in, and I will model using that, and then we'll graduate to Kibo. But if you just show them the simplest moves, and just scanning is fun, and let them think about, okay, what do you want this robot to do? Okay, do you want to go forward, back, forth, straight, make sounds? Show them that that's all it is. You're taking your ideas, putting it together with these blocks, scan it, and Kibo's going to execute what you want it to do. So just go in there with that, feeling, and letting them know that it's not as hard as you think it is. Just get your hands on it, do it, and then you'll see it's not as intimidating as you assume that it will be. Because if you model for them and those kids see the excitement, that teacher's going to want you to come in that classroom more often. And then eventually you can wean yourself off, because the teachers have seen it so many times. Give it to them, let them play. It's like, you treat them as students. You model, they learn from you, and then you wean yourself off. And then here you go, you put it in the teacher's hand, and then it goes to their classes. So model. And make it an after school session.
Yeah, that's great. And that's such a good point. I mean, hands-on learning is really kind of best for all of us at any age. So just experimenting with it creates that comfort that makes it seem that much more possible. All right, well, I want to be respectful of both your time and our guests' time. We just have a minute to wrap up and say goodbye. I wanted to share a resource that is available to you for free from KinderLab. You can download it right here within the GoToMeeting user interface. It's in the handouts section if you'd like to download it, or you can grab it from our website. It's a collection of lesson plans that outline activities very similar to the ones that Jane and Tamika talked about. So they're all based on kind of movement of the robot in a physical space. But we're doing that in a social studies context with a neighborhood map, or a literacy context with a setting for a story, and Kibo becomes a character. So these are 8 different examples of lessons that you can run kind of right away that connect robotics and coding to other cross-curricular areas: math, ELA, social studies, and science. So help yourself to that document. It's a PDF. I hope it's useful to you. And there's lots more curriculum where that came from. So just this last slide is the contact information for our wonderful guests, and they kindly are happy to share that information and would love to hear from you if something that you heard today from them kind of sparks your interest and you want to connect. We've got Tamika's Twitter account that she mentioned, Jane's email address, and Tamika's email as well. And of course, you can also reach out to me or the other folks at KinderLab if you'd like to learn more about Kibo. So thank you all for coming. And Tamika, thank you very much for your time. And Jane, thank you so much for your insights as well. So we hope to see you all again at a future webinar. And thanks again. Bye.